Welcome back to the Bioactive Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Riley Kirk, and today is a solo episode, which I'm super stoked about. It's been a minute since I've done one of these, but I'm in such a mood to just be calm and chill and talk a little bit about science, but like not in a super stressful way. So I'm hoping that you can relax during this episode too. I'm hoping you're doing something you enjoy or traveling to somewhere you enjoy, or at the very least like drinking a fun coffee or a fun drink that you enjoy. So make sure you're taking deep breaths and chilling as much as you can with me during this episode. The theme of this episode is something that I talk about quite a bit in my upcoming book, Reefer Wellness, which is something that I've always done, but I've recently learned that a lot of people don't do. And that is using your consumption method to help curate your cannabis experience. And let me start by saying I'm fully aware that not everyone can afford every consumption method, but at the same time, I'm also aware that a lot of people are confused by a lot of consumption methods. And as somebody who quite literally uses every consumption method, I think I'm uniquely situated to talk about this. So we're going to talk about smoking and vaping, dry herb vaping, dabbing, edibles, and we're not just going to talk about, their therapeutic benefits, which we talk about a lot, but instead we're going to kind of talk about the ways you can use these different consumption methods to produce different entourage effects in your body, because a smoking entourage is different than an edibles entourage because you're processing different chemical reactions are happening. And honestly, in my opinion, I think that there, at least for me, like different methods really vibe with different times of the day. So I'm just going to kind of discuss how I go about not necessarily dosing, but how I make decisions on when I consume one way versus another. And this might not resonate with you. You might be like, oh my gosh, I've never not related more to someone. But if you've like only ever smoked joints and you're thinking about trying something else, or you only use edibles and you're thinking about trying inhalation methods, this might be a valuable episode for you. While we're talking about consumption methods, though, I want to do a giveaway this week, and I'm hoping to do multiple giveaways before the holidays because you guys deserve it. And honestly, people are very often offering me a bunch of free products or asking me to try certain things, which mad love. I respect that so much. Thank you. But now I've been asking and saying, can I also get one for my podcast listeners? Because, if I get to try all these fun things, it would be cool for some of you to get to try them as well. So what I'm giving away this week is super exciting. It is the Venti Dry Herb Vaporizer by Storz & Bickel. If you know me, you know I love Storz & Bickel products. I obsess over my Volcano constantly. My husband calls it my pacifier because when I'm home, I'm like, it's like always in my hand and like crinkling around me. It's so silly. So this Venti Dry Herb Vape, I think it retails for like $450. It's a really, really, really nice vape. And a dry herb vaporizer means that you actually put in cannabis herb into the chamber here. So you unscrew the top. The chamber here, you put herb in. I just ground up some herb and put it in there. Then you twist the top back on. You press the on button and it starts to heat up. The Venti is really unique because it heats up to temperature in 20 seconds, which is absurd. I've also used the Mighty Plus from Storz & Bickel, which is another portable handheld dry herb vaporizer like the Venti here. And I love, love, love that device. I'm also going to be getting my brother one of these for Christmas because he really wants one. So if you're listening, Dan, you're getting a dry herb vape for Christmas. Okay, so this is already heated up, so I'm just going to show you how I use it. You turn the nozzle here, and then you just take like a steady, not even deep, but like a steady inhale for a couple seconds. It's really smooth, it's really nice, and you can really taste the flavor coming through. Cool. To be entered to win this Venti dry herb, well, not this one, I just hit this one, but a different one. To be entered to win a Venti, all you have to do is be following Bioactive Podcast on Instagram and Storz & Bickel from Instagram. And when I post about the Venti in a couple of days, you just need to comment your favorite strain. That's all, and I'm going to pick a winner randomly. And I think I'll announce on the next podcast episode. All right, so let's get into the meat of this episode, which is talking about how this entourage effect changes as we're changing our consumption methods. I'm also going to answer a few just common questions that I've been getting either on TikTok, Instagram, or YouTube, and hopefully that can help people as well. So first I want to start with talking about smoking, because as many of you know, I researched cannabis smoke for years. It is a really, really unique consumption method, and it really does have unique therapeutic value. Still, the most medical cannabis consumers prefer smoking as their consumption method, and this is me included. There's something so special about smoking. And I want to give a quick anecdote about this too. I get really bad migraines, really bad migraines. And when I get migraines, I get sick. I just start vomiting like crazy. So I recently had a migraine and I was sick. And usually I don't turn to cannabis for my migraines. But this time I was like, you know what? My body's kind of telling me that I need cannabis. And I was smelling the different varieties I had. And I was smelling a really uplifting variety. I think it was some cross of Jack. And my brain was like, oh my God, I think I actually got sick from just smelling it. And then I smelled the GMO, which is this super savory, earthy, indica, classic indica. It's an exotic variety, but I smelled that and I was like, oh my gosh, I need that. So I just use my one hitter when I have a migraine, and I just take one hit just to see how it goes, because I don't want it to get worse. And it actually helped my migraine for the first time. So I had tried to dry herb vape flower while I had a migraine, but when I dry herb vaped, it made my head worse. So when I smoked it, though, it was almost instantaneous relief. I was literally tremoring. That's how I was dehydrated and just feeling awful. And almost immediately, my body just stopped tremoring, right after I inhaled the smoke. But when I inhaled the vapor from that same variety, it did not help my migraine. I find this absolutely fascinating. This happened really recently. But let's talk about what's happening there. So we know that a lot of the chemistry is changing. One of those chemical changes that's happening, or a group of those chemical changes that's happening, is decarboxylation, meaning the THCA, the CBDA, all the acidic molecules that are produced in the cannabis plant. Remember, the cannabis plant does not produce THC. The cannabis plant produces THCA. So it only produces these cannabinoids in the acidic form. So one of the first thing that happens when we are heating up cannabis via lighting it is many of those cannabinoids, all of them actually, are being decarboxylated. So that acidic group's leaving, that CO2 group, and now we have the molecules we know and love, THC, CBD, CBG, etc. So that is happening, yes, but that is not where it ends. There is so much more happening. So there are literal chemical reactions, chemical rearrangements happening when we are smoking, and that fire is acting as a catalyst. So we have, of course, THC is partially converting into CBN, but we also have other molecules that are being created, like CBE, which I believe is pronounced cannabidiol. And then there's CBT, cannabitriol, there's CBL, cannabicyclol, and these compounds are CBND is produced from CBD, and these compounds are literally almost exclusively found in cannabis smoke when it has been converted or it's been exposed to those high heats. So that is one definite unique thing about smoking, and I do think that adds to the therapeutic value. Of course, it's how quickly we feel those molecules too. You know, I was just talking about migraines, but if you have some sort of inflammatory gut condition, et cetera, something that happens really fast, you're going to want relief from that too. There's also other chemistry that's not necessarily positive, but it is part of that entourage of what is being produced. Now, of course, when we smoke things like tobacco, bad chemistry is being produced. We get these compounds called nitrosamines that are produced from the nitrogen-containing tobacco molecules, and when they're exposed to heat, they're converting into these carcinogens. But with cannabis, we are still producing potentially carcinogenic molecules, but there has not been a heavy link between smoking cannabis and developing cancer. But we also have other smelly molecules in the smoke, like acrolein, which gives it that smoky smell. If you smell your bong water, some of that is acrolein. So there's other chemistry too. The tar, carbon monoxide that's exposed to our body, et cetera, et cetera. So the entourage of molecules that are entering your body when you're smoking is different compared to other consumption methods. Personally speaking, I usually do not smoke first thing in the morning. And the reason I don't smoke in the morning specifically is because I do get super, super, super stoned when I smoke first thing in the morning, the old wake and bake. And for some people, this is like the reason they're smoking in the morning, to get that medicine in their body to feel better. And that's amazing. But for me, it kind of just starts my day in a little bit of a daze. And I don't love that. I love to wake and bake on the weekends, but I don't do it Monday to Friday. I probably start consuming around noon every day. And usually my daytime consumption is either dabs or dry herb vape at a low temperature. So smoking produces some pretty unique chemistry, and even though it does produce CBN, I wouldn't say it's always a sedating experience for me. I can get very, very stimulated from using cannabis, but my favorite times to smoke specifically is when I'm outside or I'm going to be outside. So for me, smoking is the best when I'm in a group of people, when I'm walking around, when I have time to really sit, relax, enjoy, be creative, kind of take things in. That's my favorite time to smoke. So smoking produces probably the largest entourage effect, as I would call it, like the largest, most complex entourage effect, because you are producing the most chemistry. You're starting with flower, which is extremely chemically diverse, and then we are producing essentially a whole nother network of compounds, which is insane. And if you guys follow Dr. Marcus Rogan at all, if you follow him on LinkedIn, he's part of the Science of Smokability team. One of the most profound things that I've heard him say was talking about smoking and talking about how smoking is actually consuming a concentrate, dry herb vaping, and of course smoking. Because as you're smoking, you're creating an oxygen deficient environment while you're inhaling, and you are essentially smoking at the end where that ember is, where that actually burning is happening. But then as you're pulling that hot air through that joint, you're dry herb vaping. But then as you're accumulating those oils in that joint, as you burn it and as those oils accumulate, you're also taking in a concentrate. So smoking is the most complex and immersive experience in my mind. So I essentially use that for when I decide to smoke a joint, when I'm ready to be immersed, when I'm ready to be fully vulnerable to the cannabis and kind of just okay, I want to be creative. I want to go for a walk. I want to socialize. That's when I'm going to be smoking. And I smoke pretty much every day, but I really, really, really enjoy smoking outside. It's not to say I don't smoke inside, but I do have animals. I have 2 cats and a dog. And I don't like smoking inside because I don't like forcing them to breathe smoky air. So that's just personal preference. I know that's not very stoner of me, but I really don't prefer smoking indoors as my as my place, my sanctuary to smoke. Okay, that kind of brings us to one of the first questions that I've received that I would love to answer in this episode, which is, why is our cannabis more highly regulated than our groceries? And I think that's such a good topic because cannabis is extremely, 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 extremely highly regulated. And many would argue it's too regulated. I am many. I think cannabis is too regulated. And I think it's just a product of the times. We're seeing, as we kind of get towards legalization, I feel like people need to convince the non-believers that this product is safe and that it's okay to use. So we are maybe over-testing and over-regulating our industry for now, but we'll see how things evolve over time. But okay, the question, why is our cannabis so highly regulated and our groceries aren't? And what I would say about this is that we don't smoke our groceries. And that's a really important point because our liver, our body has ways of detoxifying things that enter our body. So if we take something that may be not beneficial for us and we eat it and it processes through our liver may be able to make that toxic molecule less toxic. However, when you're smoking, you're not processing anything through your liver. Instead, it's really just kind of beelining it right to your brain, to your bloodstream. So with smoking products, I do understand why it is so highly regulated, because the second that you're inhaling, you're vaping, you're smoking, you're losing that protective mechanism for your brain. So I think this is why it's important to buy quality cannabis, but also, to have the right to grow, because we've seen these stories come out in the industry, like the pesticides in California, in a regulated industry. And people should have the right to at least cultivate quality product if they can't trust the industry. I do trust a lot of people in the industry, a lot of people, but not everyone. And if you're unable to tell what quality cannabis is, you're kind of in a situation where you're kind of vulnerable. So I guess in conclusion, I think the reason why it's more highly regulated than groceries is, one, people are still scared, and two, we're smoking and inhaling these products, so we really don't have a defensive protective mechanism in our body. Okay, let's get into dry herb vaping next. That again is like what this device is, the Venti. It is also things like the Volcano, which is a tabletop vaporizer. We also have this product I'm going to grab right here. And this is my go-to piece for work. I have this dry herb vape in my office, and then at home I have my Volcano go-to. So this is a dry herb vape by Vapvana. I've talked about this before, but essentially it just attaches into a bong. So then you put your flower in this unit here at the top, and then you just put the heating coil over it. And then when you inhale, you're just pulling that hot air through the flower and then inhaling it. So this is another form that dry herb vapes come in. And for dry herb vapes, I think, you can look up temperature charts and say, okay, I want this exact temperature to vaporize this exact cannabinoid or terpene. And I do think that's valuable. But for this conversation, I think we're just going to keep it at low temp dry herb vaping versus high temp dry herb vaping. And of course, that's subjective. So it's like, what do you mean by low temp versus high temp, right? So typically, what is low temp? I think what would actually be considered low temp is 145 to 160 Celsius. But for me, a low temp is like 180 Celsius. And I'm using Celsius because that's what my vapes use as their metric here. And then for high temp dry herb vaping, I would say like 220, 230 Celsius is high temp dry herb vaping. And the reason I'm kind of being specific here is these are completely different experiences. Low temp versus high temp dry herb vaping. Completely different experiences. When I get a new flower, like when I got back from California and I was at the Emerald Cup, I had some of the best, dankest flower, and I could not wait to consume it via dry herb vape because the flavor comes out so strong in a dry herb vape. It's amazing. At low temperatures specifically. So if I'm really trying to taste that terpene profile and get a taste of really what's unique about that flower, I'm going to hit it at a low temp. And that's literally like me wine tasting, but with weed, where I really just am after the flavor. And effects matter too. But at that low of a temperature, you're realistically not going to be vaporizing all of what that plant has to offer. So I wouldn't say it's a completely accurate experience on the plant, but it is a general consensus of experience. So for me, at low temps, I'm really just going for flavor or for uplifting effects. And this is even, honestly, if I have a variety that might be more of a, quote, indica, more something that is more sedating, and has that terpene profile, if I still hit that at a lower temperature, I'm still going to be stimulated by it. Like, I'm not going to feel sleepy by it, but you're still going to get that nice flavor rush. So if I am working during the day and I'm typically consuming via dry herb vape at a low to medium temperature. I don't hit it at a high temp during the day because almost every time that I dry herb vape at a high temp, I'm getting sedating effects. I'm getting tired, like almost every time. And I also want to emphasize here that I think people might think that because dry herb vaping is thought to be healthier, that it might be less hard hitting than smoking. But let me tell you, I've seen that volcano take more people out, like more stoners out, where they had to tap out than like any sort of blunt or joint that's been handed around. Because dry herb vaping is essentially a concentrate, if you think about it. I mean, if we were to look at the size of a bowl, that you're smoking a bowl, and the size of a dry herb vape bowl, they're going to be pretty similar, right? But if you were smoking a bowl, you're going to be lighting it on fire and combusting everything that you're smoking in there, right? So it's going to leave behind just ash, just a little bit of organic material. So you've inhaled all of the cannabinoids, terpenes, but also all of that organic matter and things that might not be bioactive. You're consuming all of it. Whereas dry herb vaping, you're just pushing hot air through that flower and vaporizing the things that can vaporize at the temperature range that you provided, which is mainly your cannabinoids and terpenes. So you're leaving behind a lot more organic material. And if you literally look at that under a microscope, it literally still looks like the plant. It just kind of looks like deflated and dead, but it still looks like a plant. So if you're thinking like puff by puff of what you're inhaling more cannabinoids and terpenes per puff dry herb vape versus smoking. And it's a different experience. You're going to get less of that entourage, less chemical transformation because you have a lower temperature. So it's actually going to be probably like the truest form to the actual plant that you're consuming is when you're dry herb vaping, especially at those kind of lower temperatures, and you're not getting that degradation, you're not getting that transformation, you're not getting a lot of those potentially negative compounds that are produced during smoking, produced during that process. And concentrates come in so many different types. I mean, you can have anything from like a THCA diamond, a diamond in sauce, which is THCA crystals in terpene sauce. You can have a rosin, which is a full plant solventless extract. You can have live resin, which is a plant that was harvested and then extracted in solvent. You could have just straight up traditional hash. That hash could be aged or not aged. There are so many different variables when we get into concentrates. And I'm actually going to have a guest on the podcast that is going to walk you through these different types very slowly for anyone who maybe isn't a connoisseur but wants to learn more about the dab world. And that's not this episode. But this episode, I do want to talk about when I like to consume dabs. And this might be a little controversial to maybe a new listener, but it's not within community because I recently was talking to quite a few people about this at PuffCon, which is an event that Puffco puts on for the community. It's absolutely amazing. But I prefer dabs as a daytime uplifting effect type of product. And that's not every kind of dab. There's definitely some dabs that will make me feel more relaxed and make me feel more lethargic. But most of the time, I take what I would consider like a micro dab, a very, very small dab. I'm not ripping like massive dabs during the day. I'm just kind of like microdosing. And it typically is a really uplifting feeling for me. And it's so clean feeling. It's like dabs are almost like, it's almost like a little bit of tunnel vision. Like it helps me focus so much because it really is a cleaner product compared to some other ones, especially if you're buying high quality dabs. And when I'm kind of taking those micro dabs throughout the day, it helps me because it's very on the go as far as a consumption method. You know, I don't love taking the time to sit down and roll up and go for a walk like in the middle of a day at 11 o'clock when I have meetings and stuff. But if I'm just like writing, taking calls, emails, just kind of a normal work day, dabs are definitely my go-to. But with that being said, I do think dabs are something that everybody should try, but they're not necessarily someone's like a good first consumption method for people, in my opinion, because they can be kind of easy to take a little bit too much. And if you don't already have a tolerance to THC and you're not used to the feeling of being medicated in that way, I'm not sure it's a great first consumption method. But if you are somebody who uses a lot of flower, you might be kind of a low responder, so you might need a little more product compared to other people. I think dabs are a great way to medicate. They get a lot of hate. I know they get a lot of hate, but I really do think it's a clean, creative, productive, like really beautiful high that is actually quite easy to dose once you get a little more comfortable with the different types of concentrates. Now, I used to hit my Puffco at the highest temperature possible. Let me look up those temperatures just so I can like report to you what they were. I used to hit it on red, which is, okay, it says that the different settings are white, which is 600 degrees Fahrenheit. That is the highest temperature. Red, which is 550. That's what I used to hit it at. Green, 500. And blue, 450. So now I have found, and I found this out at PuffCon, my favorite level to hit my Puffco at is definitely green, which is the 500 degrees Fahrenheit. This is a great balance between flavor and effects, because the really, really hot dabs, honestly, like, I'm messed up for like a long time. It's actually not really a positive experience for me, which brings me back to my first dab ever, which I took too much, way too much, and I physically could not walk down the stairs. So I've always been trying to avoid that again since, and I've been very good at that. But I do think kind of keeping it low and slow is a way to have more of a like euphoric positive feeling from dabs compared to that like super heavy couch lock, like my eyes can't focus on anything type high. So that's just my like personal preference for setting. You can choose whatever you want, but I will say not at any of the temperatures we just mentioned, but at really, really hot temperatures. Like if you were to be ripping a banger, like an actual glass device and hitting it really, really hot, if you do hit it too hot, it can produce some pretty concerning compounds like benzene, which are known to be cancer-causing molecules. So I would just try to avoid really hot dabs if you can. All right, the last consumption method that we're going to discuss in this episode is going to be edibles. And I'm not going to say I'm a hater of edibles, because I'm not. And I recently tried some new ones that I want to give a shout out. Space Gems. If you guys have not tried Space Gems, they're made with ice hash rosin, which is a full spec extract. It has every compound in the plant. It's beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. And I had a 10 out of 10 experience with these Space Gems. I think they're 10 milligrams each. They just like scream quality. The flavor is quality. The feeling is quality. The input material is quality. And that actually, that was a very positive experience for me. But I will say I've had my most negative experiences with cannabis with edibles. By far. And it's important to know that different people are going to metabolize edibles differently. Not all of us are going to feel exactly the same from taking 10 milligrams. In fact, a lot of people are going to feel absolutely nothing from 10 milligrams. And some people are going to be so stoned that they like can't drive tomorrow after 10 milligrams. So it's really important to realize the entire spectrum of people who react to products differently. But specifically when we're talking about edibles, the reason it's so variable through the population is because we have different levels of specific enzymes, are called isozymes, in our liver. And different people's genetics, different people's metabolism, the food you ate that day, you know, it all is going to impact the rate that you metabolize edibles and how well you metabolize edibles. This is something we're like currently writing up through the network of applied pharmacognosy. We are currently writing this up to be published into peer review for the first time, but we've collected 3 data sets now that show that 16% of people, or around 16% of people, can't feel the effects of edibles at all. Can you imagine if that was any other pharmaceutical drug or any other sort of, you know, medicinal product? We would be studying that. We would be wondering why that is. And I'm hoping we are going to be studying that. We have some groups interested in collaborating with us to dig into that deeper into the future. But a lot of people can't feel edibles. So it's obviously not the preferred consumption method of those people. And for some people, like if it takes you 200, 500 milligrams, even a gram of THC to feel anything, I would not be taking edibles like at all if it took that much. That's very wasteful for you. I'm sure that's a valuable, expensive product. But also like that's a lot for your liver to have to still metabolize. Even if you're not feeling the effects of it, your body still has to process all those molecules. So, don't just keep pounding it in there and hoping something's going to change. I would instead find a consumption method that suits your body better. But with edibles, this expanded entourage effect is almost as profound as smoking, where it's like completely different. Because we always talk about when your body is metabolizing THC, it transforms THC into a different molecule called 11-hydroxy-THC. It's called that because the OH group is called a hydroxyl group. On the 11th position of THC, there's a hydroxyl group. So that's 11-hydroxy-THC. So the reason this expanded entourage is so crazy with edibles is because it's not just THC that's transformed in the liver and prepared for excretion, aka pooping and peeing. It's actually every single molecule in the cannabis plant. Every single cannabinoid is changed by the liver into something that's easier for it to excrete and get rid of. The terpenes, we don't really know what happens when we take in a terpene or an edible that has terpenes in it. You know, we don't know if that even makes it to the liver or what happens. So this also brings us to, before we keep talking about this, brings us to another question, which was, do edibles have strain-specific effects? And the answer to that is maybe. I would say it definitely does to a degree, because even if the terpenes aren't making it all the way through, you can still have an entourage effect. You can still have a strain-specific effect from cannabinoids alone. Because if you have a dozen different cannabinoids in a product, then yeah, the synergy between those cannabinoids, whether it's CBD and THC, CBT and CBE, CBC and CBG, whatever it is, the synergy of all these different medicinal compounds is still going to get through into that edible product. So what we don't know is either when you're decarboxylating an edible, when you're cooking an edible, or when you're eating an edible, we don't know what happens to the terpenes as it flows through that process. Now, of course, some companies have added terpenes back into like a gummy product or something like that to increase this entourage. And again, we just don't know if the terpenes are even in the same form once they reach the liver, or once they reach the liver, if they're changed in such a profound way that they don't even look like the parent compound anymore, or maybe they're just as medicinal eaten as smoked. We just don't know, unfortunately. This is somewhere we definitely need more research. And we've also seen other companies add in things like melatonin for nighttime sleep products to, increase the likelihood of helping with sedating effects, or adding in L-theanine or some sort of caffeine for a daytime effect of an edible. And I guess that's kind of still an entourage effect, but I think when we mention entourage effect, we're really specifically talking about the molecules in the cannabis plant interacting with each other. With that being said, I would always still look for products like I just mentioned, like Space Gems is such a good example. It's made with ice hash rosin, and that is such a great starting material because it contains this really chemically diverse, beautiful entourage of molecules. I've tried, THC distillate edibles, and they definitely get you high. They definitely do the job, but it's just fully and truly a different experience when you have all the molecules versus just one. Okay, I think it's about time to wrap up this episode, but I just want to reiterate that each of these consumption methods are tools in the toolbox. And sometimes it really doesn't have to be that expensive to try different consumption methods, especially if you grow cannabis and especially if you can extract it and make different things at home. But even if you can't, maybe every year having a goal of just expanding to one new method so you continue to build your toolbox. But I've really found that my medicinal journey has gotten so much more into like a personalized medicine approach as I've been able to, one, afford having a diversity of strains and products with me so that I can make educated decisions on what flower profile I want to use at what time, and then pairing that with the appropriate consumption method. And this takes a lot of learning about yourself and your body. And I know people don't like to hear that, but, it took me years to learn that I liked to dab during the day and that I liked to dry herb vape at a high temperature at night. And that's why I'm sharing it here. So hopefully if your body's similar to mine, you might react kind of similar and want to try similar things. So maybe you don't have to take years to take that journey. But it is a journey of self-exploration. And I think that's one of the most beautiful things about the cannabis plant is this plant wants to teach you. Whether you're growing this plant and just learning from it and watching it and saying, oh, the leaves are changing, it needs nitrogen. Or, oh, those trichome colors are changing, it's almost time for harvest. The plant is trying to tell you things, and it's trying to tell you things when you consume it in your own body too. So I know that sounds super hippie, but I think the spiritual connection with this medicine gets better as you learn to listen to what your body's kind of asking for. And we're all going to make mistakes. Like, I still make mistakes where sometimes I get like a little bit too high and I'm like, man, that was like the wrong temperature I hit that at, the wrong dose, the wrong product type, whatever it is. And we learn from that. And if you're new to cannabis, write it down. But if you're not, like, just take a mental note and say, okay, that was the wrong something at this time. I can work on improving that in the future. Let me know if you like this episode. I can do more episodes like this in the future. But as I mentioned, I'm just like hella stressed out right now. And I really just wanted to chill with you guys and have a really casual conversation and answer some questions. So peace, love, 420. Thanks always for listening. And mad love. See you in a couple weeks.